Welcome, everyone. My name is Debbie McNeil. I am president of the League of Women Voters of Edina. I welcome you to the Candidate Forum for State Representative for House District 49A. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan volunteer organization that encourages citizens to participate in government. While we as a league do studies and take stands on issues, we do not endorse or support political parties or candidates. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates, not those of the League of Women Voters. And the sponsorship of this forum is not an endorsement by the sponsor of any candidate. I would now like to introduce our moderator for the night, Alice Moorman from the League of Women Voters, Minneapolis. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. Before we get started, I'd like to ask you to get out your cell phones and then please turn them off. Thank you. The purpose of this evening's forum is to provide the opportunity to hear the candidates discuss issues that are important to you. We will try to cover as many issues as possible in the time we have. If your questions are not answered tonight, feel free to contact the candidate directly. All candidates who filed for office and who will be on the November 6th ballot were invited to this forum. I'd now like to explain the rules and format of tonight's forum. Candidates have drawn numbers to determine the speaking order. Speaking order will rotate with each question. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to make an opening statement and 2 minutes to answer a question sent out in advance. Candidates will then have 1 minute to answer each question submitted by the audience. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to make a closing statement. A league volunteer will time candidate responses and indicate to candidates when they have 1 minute remaining, 30 seconds remaining, and when they must stop. Your timekeepers are right there in the front, gentlemen. Audience questions must be in writing and handed to a volunteer who is wearing a league button. The moderator, that's me, will ask questions. The League of Women Voters Edina determines which questions will be asked and attempts in good faith to cover the topics of interest indicated by the questions submitted by you. All written questions become the property of the League of Women Voters of Edina. This forum is being videotaped. Please hold your applause until the end of the forum. I would like to introduce you to our candidates for Minnesota House of Representatives District 49A. Bill Glahn got number 1, and Ron Earhart is number 2. And so now each candidate has 2 minutes for their opening remarks, and we'll start with Bill.
Thank you. And thanks to the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum, and of course, thanks to my opponent, Mr. Earhart, for coming here. And I know all Edinans wish to thank Mr. Earhart for his 18 years of service to our community. A little bit about myself and why I'm involved in this race. I am Bill Glahn, the Republican nominee for House District 49A, Edina. I appreciate all of you coming out this evening. It's great to see the room filled beyond capacity. Shows the level of interest in this race and interest in politics and interest in the future of not just Edina, but of our state and our nation. So I got involved because I believe I offer the best leadership for Edina's future. And I have been here in this community for a number of years now, having moved here from Minneapolis with my wife and my daughter when my daughter got old enough to be of school age. We came here for the Edina Public Schools. My daughter is enrolled in the Edina Public Schools and was the prime motivator for our moving to this community. A little bit of my background. I'm a management consultant. I own my own consulting firm. I was formerly a partner and a controller in a larger firm based in Minneapolis. In between, I had stints at the beginning of my career with the federal government and most recently with the state government, working for Governor Tim Pawlenty as his Director of Energy Security. Very much enjoyed the opportunity to serve the state government as a public official, working with the governor and the state legislature and passing some important legislation, of course bipartisan, because back then the Democrats were in control of the both houses of the legislature, and the governor, of course, was a Republican. So I am the Republican nominee, and I take serious the office of representative because I believe the role of the representative is to represent literally you, the Edina voters, you, the Edina citizens. So I look forward to your questions and hearing what issues are on your mind. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron, would you like to make your opening statement, please?
Well, if I have to. I see a lot of nice people here I've known for years, and some that maybe don't think I'm so nice, but that's okay. They're all fair and equal, I'm sure, tonight. It's time to return, I think, common sense to the legislature. The current legislature appears to have almost none. No one seems to have the ability to compromise, and I know how to do that. I am a moderate centrist and passed many bipartisan bills while in office. When I walk into the Capitol today, often someone will say, "We need your common sense back here." And as a thrust in that direction, I have about 25 plus endorsement from a variety of different groups and organizations, probably more diverse than anybody else. And I'm going to read those real quick. They are the Minnesota Dental Association, Conservation Minnesota, International Union of Operating Engineers, Minnesota Association of Professional Employees, Outfront Minnesota, Project 515, Minnesota Professional Firefighters, National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors, Clean Water Action, North Central States Regional Council of Carpenters, Minneapolis Building and Construction Trades Council, Democratic Party, Sierra Club, Minnesota Nurses Association, Peace Officers Alliance of Minnesota, United Transportation Union, Minnesota Medical Association, Police Officers Federation of Minnesota, Planned Parenthood, NARAL, Abortion Rights Council, Minnesota AFL-CIO, and a couple more. What was that? Hold it up. While in office, I was endorsed 9 times by the Minnesota Chamber of Commerce and one guardian of a small business 10 times for working to protect and preserve a small business.
Thank you. The first question that I'm going to ask was sent to the candidates in advance. And I'm going to ask the first question of Bill, and then Ron will have a chance to answer it. That question is, what specific measures would you support to reduce the state budget deficit and to repay the money owed to the school districts?
Thank you. I did want to mention, since my DFL opponent, Mr. Earhart, mentioned his endorsement list, I have been endorsed by the Minnesota Chambers PAC as well as the Twin West Chambers PAC, so I did want to clarify that. As far as the budget's concerned, I did something I'm not sure I recommend to everybody. I spent quite a bit of time on the Minnesota Management and Budget Department's website researching the current budget situation, looking at the most recent numbers that the MMB folks have put out. It looks like we're going to be about 5% better in terms of revenues in the next 2 years than the past 2 years. Now, it's the next 2 years that this incoming state legislature is going to be setting the budget for. If you look at the past budget, and again, depending on how you do the baseline, it's anywhere from $35.2 to $35.5 billion in spending based on the revenue we have coming in the last 2 years. We'll have another 5% on top of that, roughly another $1.5 billion to $2 billion. So most people would think that another 5% additional revenue should be enough to take care of any needs that the state of Minnesota has. Inflation's running something in the neighborhood of 3%. So with 5% additional revenue coming in under current tax rates, under current law, we'll have more than we need in terms of the inflation adjustments to meet the needs of Minnesota without resorting to tax increases, without resorting to budget cuts. As for the shift, I think the most important thing we do in the next 2 years in the next legislature is to stop the damage. You know, the first rule of holes is to stop digging. We need to stop the gimmicks, stop kicking the can down the road. We need to have a fair and honest budget that solves this year's problems with this year's revenues. So I would advocate we use the revenue that's going to come in, another 5%. We will still have the largest budget in the history of the state of Minnesota, even after adjusting for inflation.
Thank you. Ron, do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I wrote it down.
Thank you.
Every year I was in office, I did a survey of how to handle a deficit situation. So, and there were quite a few deficit situations during that time. Invariably, the people would ask not cut everything, not tax everything. They would come down in the center and say, we need to cut some and we need to raise some new revenue. And I think that if I were to run that today, that same poll today, which I do, like I said, every time I was in office, they would say about the same thing. Now, we do have the problem with the present legislature, and going back quite a few years now, has been unable to use all the tools in the toolbox, meaning that they were not going to raise state taxes, but they continued to raise our local taxes. And that's one of the problems that's going on with our property tax. Our property taxes in the last 10 years for the state have doubled. They've gone from a little over $4 billion to $8 billion. So if you've noticed that in your own property tax bill, it's because the state people that were in charge, mostly the governor, pushed things back. Instead of paying for them at the state level, they pushed them back to the counties and the cities. And they don't have any other way to raise money but to raise your property taxes. So that's one other thing that we have to be concerned about. But I think that the people will understand that maybe we don't do the top 2% or 1%. Maybe all of us are in this together, and all of us ought to look again and see if there are more cuts that are available, and also look at whatever revenues we can enhance with. That's enough. Thank you.
Okay, this is the first question from the audience, and we'll direct it first to Ron. What is your position on the proposed constitutional amendments, and what are your reasons?
And what are your what?
What are your reasons for your position on the proposed constitutional amendments?
You got 1 minute? I'm against both of those. I'm voting no on both of them. Of course, I didn't vote to put them on the ballot in the first place, and I don't know what those people are, what's wrong with those people over there that they're doing it anyway, because they can't get anything else passed in a majority way. They want to end run the process here. The reasons are the marriage amendment. The people should be allowed in this democracy of ours to not have government poking in their bedrooms, and this is another instance of that. On the photo ID, we know that from the Secretary of State's material that 215,000 people will be disenfranchised, and that makes 1,900 in Edina using that same data. So that's the reason we don't want to do that. We don't want to suppress the votes. We want to increase the people who vote.
I'll repeat the question for you.
No, that's fine.
Is it okay? Thank you.
I'm a big believer in direct democracy, that for important issues, we put it before the people so we hear the voice of the people as directly as possible. As your representative, I certainly want to channel what your views are on these issues, and I can pledge to you that no matter what Edina votes, whether it's yes or no on either amendment, I will honor what the city of Edina believes, because it's your votes that count, not mine. I have one vote and there's tens of thousands of others. As for the voter amendment, I did want to talk a little bit about that, because the amendment, if it passes, sets up legislation in 2013. The expectation is the incoming legislature will set the rules and the procedures and the budgets for all that, so we can avoid the problems that Ron was referring to. We should make sure that we don't have an impact on our elderly, our seniors, the low-income folks, and we can do that by making a smart decision on how we implement the voter ID law.
Okay, the next question will be addressed to Bill first. Will you support development of a state-based health insurance exchange rather than waiting for the federal government to act?
Well, we have an election not just for a state representative and the amendments, but we also have an election for president and Congress and our U.S. Senate coming up. And depending on the outcome of the November election, we could have a much different landscape at the federal level. So I'm a little hesitant to say yes or no on something where it might be all made moot by the November election. What I will say is, if there's going to be a federal exchange, there's an argument to be made that we should do something in Minnesota that's Minnesota specific. Recognizing what we do at this level, we have a much higher percentage of people covered under our existing programs, but we want to make sure what we do is consistent with our values, consistent with our free market principles, and making sure we don't end up by instituting this global solution actually making the problem worse.
I think that it's time we got going on this because the federal are going to mandate unless we do it. And we have now a chance to adopt an exchange that will be more suitable to Minnesota than what the feds will offer as no choice. And right now, as I understand it, the people that are holding up are the Republicans in the House and maybe the Republicans in the Senate. When they should get to work on it, instead of waiting for the federal Congress to try another overthrow of the bill. I think that's been 33 times they've tried to pass legislation that overthrows it. Supreme Court's rule, let's get on with it.
The next question I'll address to Ron first. What specifically will you do to work across the aisle with the opposing party to get something accomplished?
Well, you know, if you ever watch the sessions in the floor sessions in the legislature, I was rarely in my seat because I was working across the aisle all the time, walking around, talking to people, making deals, and making contacts with people. And I would continue to do the same things. You don't just sit there and then decide you're going to vote red or green. You move around, and then you build coalitions, and you when you're advancing bills, you certainly want to build coalitions. So I would continue to do bipartisan things. Some of the biggest bills that I've passed, the transportation bill and also the overhaul of the property tax system, were broadly based bipartisan stuff, and that's the only way you can really get good things done over there. Stop.
As I mentioned, from 2008 to 2011, I worked for Governor Tim Pawlenty as his energy person at the Capitol. With a Republican governor and a DFL legislature, you had to work across party lines. You didn't get bills introduced and heard and to the House and Senate floors without working with the other party. We had I think, a very good track record of results in getting good legislation passed through both houses and signed by the governor, which required working with the other side. And unlike my DFL opponent, I have a more recent experience at the Capitol. Been there in more recent years, know many of the players who are there today, many of the leaders of both parties, who I expect will return in this new election. So I look forward to working with my new Republican colleagues and my old cohorts in the DFL legislature to get good legislation that makes sense for Minnesota passed and signed by this DFL governor.
Thank you. The next question is on transit, and we'll start with Bill. Please describe the role of the state in transportation. What role does public transit play?
It plays an important role. We have one light rail line, we have a commuter line, the North Star route, and we have a second light rail line under construction. But I don't think we should neglect our bus system. The Metropolitan Council runs a bus system. We have a number of the suburban communities run bus systems. It's an important part of our transportation piece, but it's a part. It's not the be-all and end-all. We have an extensive freeway network that the state maintains. We have extensive trunk highways that the state supports as well. We need a comprehensive global solution. Every day, Highway 62 through Edina backs up at 3 o'clock. We need to do something about that. Perhaps a light rail line that goes through Eden Prairie was part of that, perhaps not, but we need to be careful as we spend money going forward that we actually solve the transportation problems that we have today.
So, Ron?
If we hadn't passed that bill in '08 after the bridge fell down, remember that one? You would not have built more bridges. you would not have even completed the Crosstown Commons. And the 6 Republicans that threw themselves on the sword to do the right thing for this state should be commended. To overthrow the veto of the governor who was, I don't know where. And you would not be building the Central Corridor without that bill. And I tell you, frankly, I was the driver behind that, and you can thank me for that. Now, why we need more of that is because the population is aging, and we need transportation for them when they give up their car keys, for one thing. And along those the rail lines, there's an enormous amount of development, commercial and retail development that's going on. Just enormous. And there's going to be the same thing in the Southwest Corridor if you can find out why the Republicans won't vote the money for that.
Thank you. The next question, and we'll start with Ron. Research shows that raising the price of tobacco products reduces smoking, especially among youth. Will you increase Minnesota's tobacco tax for the public health benefit?
Well, you know, we had a governor who never wanted to raise taxes, Pawlenty. He slipped that one through and called it a health impact fee. It was $400 million a year, and he used it to balance his budget, but he never raised taxes, of course. Now, if you want to just make it on the basis of the health of the people, or if you want to balance your budget, there is a reason that the studies show that especially the younger crowd doesn't want to pay the extra money, and they cut down on their smoking. So, you know, that's a real social engineering thing. But I wouldn't be against it. I think we'd have to look at that.
Bill?
I'm surprised I'm agreeing with my DFL opponent here on the social engineering. My concerns would be, what's the money going to be used for? There's been a lot of instances where we've raised revenue or gotten revenue through tobacco companies or through consumers, and with the idea being it would go toward promoting public health, and it gets diverted to plugging holes in the budget deficit, or the unfortunate example from the last go-around using these tobacco bonds to pay for more spending today and having to be paid off for decades to come. So I'm concerned with raising taxes or fees or however you want to characterize it, what you're doing with the money, what the impact is on consumers. We hear so much from this governor, Governor Dayton, about the lack of progressivity of our tax system. Who would that impact? Is it going to impact the lower income folks harder? We have to take all that into consideration before you just say, it's a great thing for the kids or is a great thing for public health. Is something I would want to take a look at further.
We'll start with Bill. What are your thoughts on Minnesota's renewable energy standard and on climate change?
In 1 minute, okay. So the renewable energy standard was something passed by the legislature under Governor Pawlenty, and one of my jobs as Director of Energy Security was implementing it, and we did. We implemented the law, and we were meeting the interim targets, and we were getting the wind power mostly, but some solar power in as well to meet those targets, and we did it in the least cost manner we could. So we tried very carefully to be cognizant of the impact of these things on the consumer. Now that we've built out a few thousand megawatts of wind, we have the situation of, as we get projects that aren't quite as economic as the first ones that went in, locations aren't as favorable, are we making our energy rates in Minnesota uncompetitive by having our rates increase at a faster rates than our neighboring states and our competitors overseas? As for the climate, I would point to the Energy Information Administration website. We have reduced greenhouse gases from the energy sector to 1992 year levels, and we did it through market forces using natural gas.
Ron?
That was the year of the energy things was 2007. I was a co-author on that bill, and I think it's still very viable. We always have to make changes, of course, and I don't know where it's looking at right now, but I think it's proceeding as planned. It has enormous goals of reduction, and I don't know where we are with that, but it's a good thing, and I think we should continue looking at other than coal. I understand, being from Virginia, how Bill likes coal so well for energy production, but as a matter of fact, there are the sun and the wind as well, and biomass and other things, and I think we should got to keep looking at all of those. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll start with Ron. Do you support the governor's attempts to unionize home daycare providers?
First of all, let me refer back to something that was said earlier about direct democracy. That it happens to be the way California has been operating for a number of years, quite a number of years, and you notice what a mess they're in. We actually are a representative democracy in the United States, not a direct democracy, because then is where we get some things in trouble, I think. And your question was?
Question was, do you support the governor's attempt to unionize home daycare providers?
Well, there are methods that you can do to make those a viable option for those people without the governor ordering it. I think if they go through the process that is necessary, that they should be allowed to do it. The governor has been declared out of order, if I remember right.
Okay, Bill?
No.
No.
That's the short answer. The little longer question, it is interesting that my DFL opponent brought up California, because they have followed that balanced approach that he's talked about of both raising taxes and increasing spending. And they have the lowest credit rating in the country to show for the effort. But they're also very antagonistic towards small business in California. And home daycare and home provision of daycare services is exactly the kind of jobs we should be encouraging in Minnesota. I've had a number of people at the door, or people come up to me and talk about they run daycare services out of their home, they provide child care services out of their home. They're very concerned about having to join a union, what cost that would impose, all the regulatory work that would go along with it. We should be encouraging entrepreneurship. We should be encouraging people to start their own businesses, and forced unionization is exactly the wrong direction.
Thank you. And Bill, we'll start with you. Which should come first, setting a budget or evaluating our current government levels?
Could you clarify what you mean by government levels?
That's what the question says. So you gentlemen get to
Oh,
figure out
all
what
right,
that
great.
means.
Then I'll interpret it at will. Yeah, I think from my answer to the prepared question, we really need to look at what revenue we're going to have coming in the door, if you want to interpret that as government levels. We're going to have, we think, another 5%, well above the rate of inflation, additional revenue each of the next 2 years that we're setting the budget for. Based on the resources that we'll have coming in the door, then we should set priorities for our budget and budget accordingly. So we'll be very interested in seeing these next couple of forecasts of both our economic situation. Tax revenues have been running, again, 5% above expectations. We should hope that would allow us to pay back the shift a little earlier and also to fund our priorities, but it's revenues first, budget later.
So,
Well, it seems to me that we better take a hard look at what we've done to education over the past, 6 to 8, 10 years. Right now, higher ed is running at a 1998 budget authorization. That's where they're at right now. And if we're going to provide the credible workforce that business wants, I asked the retired chairman of Target, why didn't he move his company Target to South Dakota? Because he wouldn't have all these taxes. And he said, and I knew what he was going to say, there were 200 businessmen in the audience, and I knew what he was going to say, because of your educated workforce. And we're falling behind. We're not educating our kids now to compete in the U.S., but also globally. And we better decide if we're going to make the effort, extra money, extra effort to do that.
and the next question is on education, and Ron, it goes to you first. Do you believe all Edina residents should be able to attend Edina schools?
I don't have Unite Edina in my yard, a sign, but I've seen a lot of them up northwest, and they have their point. That in essence, they are making a good effort at doing that, uniting Edina, but there are also two other school districts in Edina, as you well know, Richfield and Eden Prairie. And if you really want to unite Edina, and there were a lot of people up there that weren't too happy about the way they were going about that, if they want to try it and they are successful with it, that's fine with me. But I don't think they will be successful with it, because the ramifications of what happens, it sets a precedent statewide, and you're not going to find a heck of a lot of people in other districts that are interested in this. So more power to them if they can do it.
Yes. We are one city, we have a city council, we have one mayor, we're one community, we should have one school district. And I know that Keith Downey, our current state representative, and Jeff Michelle, our current state senator, carried those bills in the last session. I'll be happy to carry that bill in the next session. You know, I'm sure there's concerns we need to work out with our neighboring cities, and we want to make sure we're good neighbors and we get on well with our neighbors to the north, east, and west. But we are one community. We should have one school system that covers everyone.
Thank you. Bullying has been an issue in the schools. Who do you think should be the power to make changes, the state or the individual school system? We'll start with you.
Well, my motto is rebuilding from the bottom up. So actually, I believe it begins with the family. And from the family, we move up to the community, the neighborhood, the school system, and then the state. We should be solving that and all our other problems from the bottom up. It's a problem in the community. We need to solve it within the community. It starts with the family. It starts with setting values and standards, and we need to move upward from there, not the top-down solution.
Well, I suppose to have some uniformity, you got to start somewhere, and it's not at the local level and everybody doing their own thing. There have to be certain standards set by the state. If we're going to measure what is happening between one school district and another, and if they expect to get money if they accomplish certain things, or more money if they're not accomplishing, Minneapolis and St. Paul inner city need more money than Edina does, or more money than Wayzata does, because they have enormous problems there. And to say that let them all run loose and try and do what they think they can do, you'd have people on the street with guns trying to find money for the Edina, or for the Minneapolis and St. Paul school systems.
Ron, the next question is, do you support, let me get the question here, do you support the construction of the Southwest Light Rail? And if so, why?
I support the construction of it because it is going to be one of the better uses of moving our workforce around. And they are predicting, I don't know, hundreds of $millions of development along that area, in that area out there. I've been to the several times as the Edina Chamber's Government Relations Chair. I went to several meetings where we looked at the plans and this and that, and they're working those out. It's a tremendous boon to that area and to the people who have, it's okay. Yeah, it's a tremendous boon for the people that the employers out there and the people that want to get to work and back and forth.
Yes, sir. Bill?
My DFL opponent mentioned the Central Corridor earlier in one of the answers, a project that Governor Pawlenty supported. I did want to begin by encouraging everybody, either in the audience or watching at home, to get out to the Central Corridor and patronize those businesses like My Village and the other restaurants and shops that are suffering during the construction of the light rail. We need to make sure those businesses can get to the other side to enjoy these benefits that Ron believes are coming from mass transit. As for the Southwest Light Rail, every time we do one of these light rail projects, it ends up being $1 billion a throw. It ends up being a Viking Stadium-sized project. So I think we need to be careful as we roll out beyond North Star, beyond the Central Corridor, beyond the Hiawatha Line, that we're making good use of taxpayer money, whether that money is local dollars, state dollars, federal dollars, is the Southwest Light Rail line, and it may be the best solution to the transportation problems of the Southwest metro area. Will it relieve congestion on 62? Will it relieve congestion on 100 and Highway 169?
So I'm going to reword this question I had and say, and we'll start with you, Bill. Is there any part of your endorsing party's platform that you do not support?
Any part of it. I'm sure that if I were honored enough to be your representative the next 2 years, that at the end of the 2 years, somebody would be unhappy with something I did. You know, we can't please everyone. So I am the Republican nominee. I've been endorsed by the Republican Party. I adhere to the principles of the party, but I can't guarantee that every vote I take on every issue is going to please everyone.
Ron?
I've always been pretty independent, and there were a lot of things about the Republican platform that I never agreed with, and I just let them go. Just leave me alone, and I'll do the best job I can for the citizens of Edina and the state, without you telling me that this is the Bible I have to read. And I would say the same thing to the Democrats. I'm sure there are going to be things. I haven't read that platform for 3 years, so I couldn't tell you specifically if there's anything I disagree with, but I'm sure there is.
It's the time now for the closing statements of the candidates, and we'll start in reverse order. So Ron, if you'll go first, and then we'll follow with Bill.
Well, I want to thank the league and Miss Ellis for doing a wonderful job for us, and all the league's helpers that have been putting the signs up and taking them down. If I were to say one thing that I think is important to Edina and most other areas of the state, it would be we must crank up our education funding. Early childhood needs a boost, K-12 needs a boost, and post-secondary, when we're sending kids out of school with $50,000 plus in debt, is wrong. There will never be, or be many years before they are part of a society. They get married, have a family and so forth, and we must change that. All three of those are must. And if I remember right, Art Rolnick once said something like this: the best investment we can make, economic investment we can make, is in the early childhood funding, and it's very much like that. I'm going to be screwing around a little bit, but that's practically what he's talking about. And I agree with him. So let's get education. This was the brain power state. It provided, that's why we have so many 500 Fortune companies here, because they want an educated workforce. Whatever it costs, that's what we have to do. That's a priority of mine.
Thank you. Bill?
Well, let me join my DFL opponent in thanking the League of Women Voters and this wonderful crowd that we've had here today and the excellent set of questions. And I would just want to close with a few thoughts on why I got into this race. I've had the privilege of being the Republican candidate and walking every street in the city, knocking on every door in the city. I've done it 1.5 times so far, and if I haven't hit you a second time, I'll be there before November. So I've heard the concerns of Edina. I take serious the idea that I'm here to represent you and your concerns at the state legislature. So I listen at the door. I find out what's on your mind, find out what's important to you, and I will be your leader for Edina's future. So again, jobs, our economy, our budget situation, our competitiveness with not just our neighboring states, but with countries around the world. Those are the reasons I got in this race. I believe those are the reasons that the two chambers have endorsed me. Education, very important to me with my daughter in the public schools here. I believe the key to maintaining the good results we've seen from education are keeping our schools united and under the control of our parents and our local communities. I'm trying to avoid more mandates from St. Paul, more mandates from Washington. We need to have schools that are competitive, as Ron explained. But you look, we rank very high in World League tables in dollars spent, very low in results. We're better than average in Minnesota, but we have a lot of room for improvement. And government reform. My predecessor, Keith Downey, has been a leader in government reform, and I hope to continue his work in the Senate. We can continue to, year after year, spend beyond inflation, spend beyond economic growth. We need to get more out of government to help our citizens, and the way to do that is to bring 21st century management techniques, 21st century information technology, new approaches, and not the same old 1950s and 1960s approach to government. I'm asking for your vote November 6th. Thank you.
That concludes our forum for this evening. I would like to thank the candidates for participating and for their willingness to participate in the democratic process by running for office. Thank you to the League of Women Voters of Edina for sponsoring this forum. This forum has been taped for broadcast on Edina Community Channel 16 and will be shown Sundays at 11 p.m. and Mondays at 7 a.m. and at 3 p.m. until Election Day. The forum will also be available for viewing on the internet through the City of Edina, www.edinamin.gov. For more information on voting and the candidates, please visit the League of Women Voters Minnesota's election website at www.vote411.org. Actually, this is a national voting website, which works well. Thank you for attending tonight's forum. Please remember to vote Tuesday, November 6th, and please stay for District 49B candidate forum, which will start at 8 o'clock in this room. Thank you very much. Good evening.